Hey, tonight, you're about to walk into a place no one should ever have to see. Not a medieval dungeon, not a haunted castle, not even the blood-soaked trenches of World War II. Tonight, you're stepping into laboratories where the people wearing white coats weren't trying to save lives. They were trying to measure how long it took to destroy them. This is the story of the Nazi medical experiments. And before we go any further, I want to make something very clear. Everything you're about to hear actually happened. Some details may sound impossible. Some may sound like scenes from a horror movie. But every major event in this story is based on documented historical evidence. Now, if you enjoy long-form historical documentaries that don't just tell you what happened, but make you feel like you're living through it, consider subscribing. And if you're listening before bed, I hope you sleep better than the people in tonight's story ever could. Now, take one slow breath. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan. Because in just a moment, your entire life is about to disappear. You wake up freezing. Not the kind of cold that makes you pull a blanket a little tighter. The kind that reaches inside your chest. The kind that makes every breath hurt. Your eyes open slowly. Above you is a rough wooden ceiling stained by years of damp air. Around you, silence. Not peaceful silence. The uneasy silence of people who are afraid to make noise. You try to sit up. Every muscle protests. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Your stomach twists with hunger so sharp it almost feels like sickness. The blanket covering you is little more than a rag. The wooden bunk beneath you is hard enough to bruise your ribs. As your eyes adjust to the darkness, you begin to see them. Rows and rows of bunks stretching into the distance. Bodies wrapped in striped uniforms. Some cough endlessly. Some stare at nothing. Some don't move at all. The smell reaches you next. Rotting straw. Coal smoke. Human waste. Disinfectant. And beneath all of it, something metallic. The smell of blood. Outside, boots crunch through frozen ground. Dogs bark. Someone screams. The scream stops almost as quickly as it began. Nobody inside reacts. Nobody even looks up. That tells you something. It isn't unusual. A bell suddenly shatters the silence. Everyone moves instantly. No hesitation. No complaints. No one needs to be told what happens if they're too slow. You climb down from the bunk. Your bare feet touch freezing concrete. The cold shoots straight through your legs. Someone beside you whispers just 2 words. Keep moving. You don't know their name. You never will. Names don't matter here. Only numbers. Within minutes you're outside. A freezing wind tears through your thin uniform. Barbed wire surrounds you in every direction. Guard towers rise above the fences. Searchlights still sweep across the camp even though dawn is beginning to break. Armed guards watch every movement. Some casually rest their hands on their rifles. Others hold leashes attached to enormous German shepherds pacing impatiently beside them. Then, you notice the smoke. Dark smoke drifting steadily from tall brick chimneys. Nobody explains where it comes from. Nobody has to. Everyone already knows. Roll call begins. You stand perfectly still. Minutes become an hour. Then another. Anyone who sways is shouted at. Anyone who falls risks never standing again. The cold slowly steals feeling from your fingers. Then your toes. Then your face. Still, you don't move. Because survival here isn't about courage. It's about becoming invisible. Eventually, the guards begin separating prisoners. Left, right, forward, back. Some are marched toward labor details. Others disappear into buildings marked with large red crosses. Hospitals. Or at least that's what they're supposed to be. You watch one prisoner glance toward those doors. For just a second, another prisoner quietly shakes his head. Not in warning. In sympathy. Because everyone understands the same terrible truth. The men who enter those buildings rarely come back the same. If they come back at all. At first, you tell yourself they're doctors. Doctors heal people. Doctors save lives. Doctors swear an oath to do no harm. But before this day is over, you'll learn that a white coat can hide something far more terrifying than a soldier carrying a rifle. Because inside these walls, science has stopped searching for cures. It's searching for limits. Your limits. And that's where tonight's story truly begins. The first thing you learn about this place is that hope disappears quietly. Nobody takes it from you. Nobody announces that it's gone. One day you simply wake up and realize you haven't imagined freedom in weeks. You only think about surviving until tomorrow. The guards march you across the frozen yard. Your stomach is empty. Your hands are numb. Every step hurts. Around you, hundreds of prisoners move in silence, their striped uniforms fluttering in the bitter wind like faded ghosts. Nobody talks. Talking wastes energy, and energy is something you can't afford to lose. Ahead, one building looks different from all the others. It's cleaner. Its brick walls aren't crumbling. The windows aren't boarded shut. Most striking of all, painted above the entrance is a large red cross. For a brief moment, your exhausted mind grabs onto the idea. A hospital. Maybe someone inside will actually help. Maybe there are real doctors, real medicine, real beds, real blankets. Then you notice the prisoners leaving the building. Or rather, the few who leave at all. One man limps so badly 2 others have to support him. Another stares straight ahead without blinking, as though whatever happened inside stripped away something far deeper than his strength. A third never comes back. The line keeps moving. You step through the doorway. Warm air hits your face. Not comforting warmth. Sterile warmth. The smell is overwhelming. Disinfectant. Alcohol. Metal. And beneath it all, the unmistakable scent of blood. The hallway is spotless compared to the barracks. White walls. Polished floors. Bright electric lights humming overhead. It almost looks like a modern hospital. Almost. Because hospitals are filled with voices. Nurses moving quickly. Doctors reassuring frightened patients. Families waiting beside beds. This place is different. Here, every sound feels wrong. The scratch of fountain pens. The click of polished leather boots. Metal instruments clinking together on stainless steel trays. Quiet conversations spoken with complete indifference. Not one voice carries compassion. Not one. A man in a perfectly pressed white coat walks past. His glasses sit neatly on the bridge of his nose. His shoes shine. He looks like the sort of physician families would trust with their children. He doesn't even glance at your face. Instead, he studies the number stitched onto your uniform. He writes something on a clipboard, then walks away. Just like that. You aren't a person. You aren't even a patient. Your inventory. A guard motions you into another room. Inside are rows of narrow beds, each one fitted with thick leather straps. The straps are old, cracked, frequently used. Nobody bothers pretending they're for your safety. Across the room sits a metal trolley lined with surgical tools. Scalpels, forceps, large glass syringes. Every instrument gleams beneath the bright lights. Not because they're preparing to save lives, but because appearances matter. Everything must look scientific, professional, orderly. That's how horror hides best. Behind organization. A prisoner lies strapped to one of the beds. He's awake. His breathing is quick and shallow. His eyes dart frantically around the room. Nobody comforts him. Nobody explains what's about to happen. One doctor quietly flips through several pages of notes. Another checks a stopwatch. A third adjusts the lamp over the bed. The patient isn't included in the conversation. He's already become part of the equipment. You realize something terrifying. The doctors aren't asking, "How do we help him?" They're asking, "How much information can we get before he dies?" The difference changes everything. These men graduated from respected universities. Many had successful careers before the war. Some published medical research. Some taught future physicians. Most had sworn the same oath every doctor takes. To protect life. To relieve suffering. Inside these walls, that oath means nothing. Here, suffering isn't a side effect. It's the objective. Military officials wanted answers. How long could pilots survive after crashing into icy water? How much blood could a soldier lose before dying? How quickly could diseases spread? Could the human body survive extreme altitude? Could entire populations be sterilized? Questions that might have been studied ethically, were instead answered using prisoners who had no choice. Every experiment began the same way. Someone pointed at a number, and that number stopped belonging to a human being. A doctor finally looks in your direction. His expression is calm, professional, almost bored. He flips another page on his clipboard, nods once, then says only a few quiet words to the guard. You don't understand German. You don't need to. The guard immediately steps toward you. Your heartbeat quickens, not because you know what's about to happen, because you realize nobody is going to tell you. In this building, consent doesn't exist. Explanation doesn't exist. Mercy doesn't exist. Only procedure. Only paperwork. Only data. Outside, a war is consuming Europe. Cities are burning. Armies are colliding across thousands of miles. Millions are dying on battlefields. But inside these walls, another war is unfolding. Not between nations, between science and humanity. And humanity is losing. You watch another clipboard close. Another prisoner is selected. Another name erased. Another body transformed into an experiment. And for the first time since arriving at the camp, you understand something that will haunt every waking moment afterward. The guards might control whether you live or die, but the men in white coats decide how you suffer before that happens. And somehow, that's even more frightening. You spend the night convincing yourself that what you saw inside the infirmary must have been the exception. Maybe those leather straps were for violent patients. Maybe the frightened faces belonged to people already dying. Maybe there's another explanation. Human beings are remarkably good at lying to themselves when the truth is unbearable. Morning arrives. The same bell. The same freezing air. The same bowl of gray water that everyone politely calls soup. Nothing tastes like food anymore. Everything tastes like survival. As you're forced toward another day of labor, an older prisoner quietly falls into step beside you. His cheeks are hollow. His eyes seem decades older than the rest of him. Without looking at you, he whispers, "Never let them notice you." His voice is barely audible. If a doctor looks at you twice, he pauses. Pray he forgets your face. Before you can ask what he means, a guard shouts. The old man disappears back into the line. Those few words stay with you all day, because they don't make sense. Doctors are supposed to notice people. That's their job. They notice illness, pain, injury. They save lives because they pay attention. So why would prisoners fear being noticed? By afternoon, you have your answer. A truck rolls into the camp. Several men step out. They're unlike the guards, unlike the SS officers. Their uniforms are immaculate. White coats, freshly pressed, polished shoes, leather briefcases. Some wear round spectacles. Others carry clipboards tucked neatly beneath one arm. From a distance, they could be professors arriving to teach at a university. One even smiles while speaking to another doctor. The guards immediately snap to attention, not because these men outrank them militarily, but because everyone understands who truly holds power here. A rifle can end your life. A doctor can decide exactly how. The physicians begin walking slowly down the rows of prisoners. Not speaking, just looking. Their eyes move from face to face. Shoulders, hands, height, weight, age. Occasionally one stops, makes a note, points. A guard immediately removes that prisoner from the line. No explanation, no questions. You realize they're shopping, not for supplies, for people. One doctor stops directly in front of you. He's younger than you expected, perhaps in his 30s. Clean-shaven, perfect posture. He doesn't look cruel. That's the unsettling part. He looks ordinary, like someone you might pass on a city street without giving him a second thought. His eyes study your face, then your hands. He reaches forward without asking, lifts your chin, looks into your eyes, checks your teeth, turns one of your hands over. His fingertips feel surprisingly gentle, more like a family physician than a prison official. For a split second, your instincts tell you this man is here to help. Then he writes something on his clipboard, walks away, never saying a word. Only after he's gone do you realize he never once looked at you like another human being. He examined you the way a butcher examines livestock. not asking whether you're healthy, only asking what use you might have. Over the following weeks, you begin hearing names whispered through the barracks after lights out. Not shouted, never shouted. Even the walls seem capable of listening. One name comes up more than any other: Joseph Mengele. Some prisoners call him the Angel of Death, not because he looks frightening, because he doesn't. Witnesses would later remember him as well-groomed, soft-spoken, even polite. He sometimes offered children sweets. He smiled. He whistled while he worked, which somehow made everything worse. Because evil is easier to recognize when it looks like a monster. It's far more dangerous when it looks pleasant. Mengele was obsessed with twins. He believed they held the key to proving Nazi racial theories. Whenever twins arrived at Auschwitz, he made sure they belonged to him. Children especially. The twins were measured constantly, photographed, questioned, blood drawn again, and again, and again. One child might receive injections. The other wouldn't. One would undergo a procedure. The other became the comparison, not because they were sick, because they were identical. To Mengele, they weren't brothers and sisters. They weren't sons or daughters. They were matching laboratory equipment. Another name spreads quietly through the camp: Sigmund Rascher. The prisoners don't know much about aviation medicine. They don't know about military research. They only know that if Rascher calls your number, cold awaits, or altitude, or both. His experiments focused on the limits of the human body. How long could a pilot survive in freezing water? How high could someone be taken before their lungs failed? Questions that could have been explored ethically. Instead, he searched for answers using prisoners who had no choice. Another physician, Karl Klauberg. His interest wasn't survival. It was sterilization. The Nazi leadership dreamed of preventing entire populations from ever having children. Klauberg believed he could develop methods to make that happen quickly, cheaply, and permanently. Thousands of women became unwilling subjects, not because they had committed crimes, not because they volunteered, simply because they existed. As more names circulate through the barracks, you notice something strange. No one describes these men as angry. No one talks about screaming fits or uncontrollable rage. Quite the opposite. They are calm, organized, methodical. They discuss procedures over coffee, compare notes, publish reports, argue over statistics. They behave exactly like scientists. Except, the science has lost its conscience. One evening you overhear two doctors talking outside the infirmary. They're debating results. One believes a different procedure might produce more reliable data. The other disagrees. For several minutes, they discuss measurements, sample sizes, consistency. Not once, not a single time, does either man ask the question that matters. Should we be doing this at all? That question no longer exists. It has been replaced by efficiency, by productivity, by results. You finally understand something historians would spend decades trying to explain. These men didn't wake up each morning believing they were villains. Most believed they were advancing medicine, serving their country, doing important scientific work. Ideology had quietly erased empathy, little by little, decision by decision, until ordinary physicians became capable of extraordinary cruelty. That realization is almost harder to accept than the experiments themselves, because monsters are easy to dismiss. You tell yourself they're different from everyone else. But these weren't mythical monsters. They were educated professionals. They attended lectures, read medical journals, had families, friends, children waiting for them at home. They simply stopped seeing certain people as human. And once that happened, almost anything became justifiable. As darkness settles over the camp, you lie awake staring at the wooden ceiling above your bunk. Somewhere outside, boots echo across frozen ground. A dog barks. A train whistle sounds in the distance. Then, from somewhere beyond the barracks, you hear a child crying. The crying continues for only a few seconds. Then silence. No one in the room says a word. No one needs to. Everyone knows where that child was taken. And everyone knows there's nothing anyone can do. Tomorrow, The experiments begin. Not in stories, not in whispers, but in front of your own eyes. And once you've seen them, there's no forgetting them. The next morning begins like every other. A bell, a line, a bowl of watery soup. For a few minutes, you almost convince yourself yesterday was just another nightmare brought on by exhaustion. Then a guard walks into the yard carrying a clipboard. Not the doctor's clipboard, his own. He begins reading numbers, one after another. Every time he calls a number, someone quietly steps forward. Nobody argues. Nobody asks why, because everyone already knows. The destination never changes. You keep your eyes fixed on the frozen ground. Maybe if you don't look up, he won't notice you. Another number. Another prisoner leaves the line. Then another. The silence is unsettling. No crying. No pleading. Only quiet footsteps disappearing toward the medical building. The old prisoner from yesterday catches your eye. He gives the slightest shake of his head. Don't look. Don't volunteer. Don't exist. The guard continues down the list. Then, he stops, looks directly at you. For one terrifying second, your heart forgets how to beat. He studies the paper, then calls someone standing 2 places behind you. The prisoner beside you exhales so quietly you almost don't hear it. Relief feels strange here. It always belongs to someone else. Later that afternoon, your labor detail is assigned near the infirmary. You're hauling heavy crates through the snow when the doors swing open. Several prisoners are escorted inside. Some limp. Others have to be supported by guards because they're too weak to walk alone. One of them couldn't be older than 16. He looks around as though he's searching for someone. Anyone. Nobody meets his eyes. Inside the building, everything runs with terrifying efficiency. White-coated doctors move from room to room. Assistants prepare instruments. Nurses arrange trays. On paper, it resembles any modern hospital. Until you notice what isn't there. No one asks for consent. No one explains procedures. No one offers reassurance. Patients aren't called by name, only by number. You watch through an open doorway as one prisoner is ordered onto an examination table. Leather straps hang from both sides. The prisoner hesitates, not because he thinks refusing is possible, because every instinct in his body tells him something is terribly wrong. A guard presses a hand against his shoulder. Another fastens the first strap, then another. Within seconds, the prisoner can't move. The doctor doesn't even acknowledge him. Instead, he turns to an assistant. Record the time. The assistant nods. A stopwatch clicks. To them, the experiment has already begun. The prisoner himself is almost irrelevant. Over the coming days, whispers begin circulating through the barracks. Stories, fragments, pieces of truth passed carefully from bunk to bunk after lights out. One man says he was injected with something that left him burning with fever for weeks. Another claims healthy prisoners were deliberately infected with diseases simply so doctors could watch them deteriorate. Someone else describes people being exposed to poisonous chemicals to test potential treatments. Every story sounds impossible until someone quietly says, "I saw it." And nobody argues, because in this place, the unbelievable becomes ordinary. One evening, an older Polish prisoner sits beside you. His hands shake constantly, whether from cold, fear, or whatever happened inside the infirmary. You can't tell. Without looking at you, he begins speaking. They don't always kill you. For a brief moment, that almost sounds hopeful. Then he continues. Sometimes they need you alive. He rubs absent-mindedly at a scar running along his forearm. They'll measure you, draw blood, inject things, write everything down. And if you survive, he pauses. They'll do it again. You ask him why. Why any doctor would do this. He stares into the darkness for several seconds before answering. They're trying to answer questions. The response catches you off guard. Questions? He nods. How? Much pain. How much cold? How much blood? How much disease? He looks at you for the first time. They already decided the answer doesn't matter. They only care about the numbers. That's when you finally understand what makes this place different from every battlefield outside these fences. A soldier may hate his enemy. A guard may punish a prisoner. Cruelty born from anger is horrifying enough. But this is something else. The doctors aren't angry. They aren't emotional. They don't shout. They observe. They calculate. They compare results. Pain isn't the goal. Pain is simply the measuring instrument. Days later, you're carrying supplies past one of the examination rooms when you hear laughter. Not prisoners. Doctors. You glance through the small window. Several physicians are discussing charts spread across a table. One points to a graph. Another nods thoughtfully. Someone makes a joke. The others laugh. For a split second, it looks like colleagues enjoying an ordinary afternoon at work. If you couldn't see the restrained prisoner lying a few feet away, you'd never suspect anything was wrong. That's the part that stays with you. Not the instruments. Not the uniforms. The normality. History often teaches us to imagine evil as loud, explosive, obvious. But here, it wears polished shoes, keeps careful records, speaks politely, and smiles. As darkness falls, you return to the barracks exhausted. Around you, prisoners settle into their bunks. No one speaks above a whisper. Some pray. Others simply stare into the darkness, waiting, because tomorrow another list will be read. Another handful of numbers will disappear through the doors of the infirmary. And sooner or later, every prisoner asks themselves the same question. Not, will my number be called? But, when you pull the thin blanket over your shoulders, sleep refuses to come. Outside, snow begins falling across the camp. Soft, silent, almost beautiful. It blankets the barbed wire, the guard towers, the frozen ground. For a few fleeting moments, the camp looks peaceful, until the morning whistle blows again. And you remember, even the snow can't cover what happens here. Winter arrives without mercy. Inside the camp, it doesn't simply make life harder. It becomes another weapon. The cold creeps into everything. It settles inside your boots, your blanket, your lungs. You stop remembering what it feels like to be warm. Then one morning, your number is called. Your stomach drops. Around you, nobody says a word. Some lower their eyes. Others quietly make the sign of the cross. One prisoner whispers something under his breath. It sounds like a prayer. The guards escort you toward the medical building. Not roughly, not violently, almost professionally, as though you're arriving for a routine appointment. Inside, the warmth feels unnatural after weeks in the freezing camp. The familiar smell returns. Disinfectant, metal, freshly polished floors. The building is immaculate, cleaner than any hospital you've ever seen. It's almost enough to make you forget where you are. Almost. A doctor waits beside the entrance. He flips through several pages on his clipboard before looking up. No greeting, no explanation, just one short nod. The guards lead you deeper inside. You enter a room unlike any you've seen before. In the center stands an enormous metal tank. Its sides are covered in frost. A thin layer of ice clings to the rim. Cold vapor rises lazily from the surface. At first, you think it's empty. Then you look closer. Dark water. Still. Silent. Waiting. Several doctors stand around the tank. Each carries a clipboard. One checks a stopwatch. Another adjusts a thermometer. An assistant carefully writes today's date across the top of a fresh report. Everything has been prepared. Every instrument arranged with precision. If you didn't know better, you'd think they were conducting an ordinary laboratory experiment. In their minds, they are. One doctor begins speaking, not to you, to the assistants. He explains body temperature, heat loss, heart rate, muscle response. His voice is calm, academic, as though he's delivering a lecture to medical students. The subject of today's lesson is you. The guards order you to remove your clothes. You hesitate. One guard steps forward. You don't hesitate again. The room feels cold now. Not freezing, just cold enough to make you shiver. Your clothes are folded neatly onto a chair. It strikes you as absurd. Someone cared enough to fold them. No one cares whether you'll wear them again. One of the doctors approaches. He places a thermometer beneath your arm. checks your pulse, counts your breathing, writes everything down. Another physician circles you slowly, examining your skin, your weight, the color of your lips. Every measurement is recorded before the experiment begins. Baseline data. You're no longer a prisoner. You're a control sample. One of the assistants climbs a small ladder beside the tank. He stirs the water. Large chunks of ice float to the surface. The doctor nods with satisfaction. Perfect. Just above freezing. Exactly where they want it. Only then do you understand. This isn't punishment. Punishment eventually ends. This has a purpose. They want answers. How long can the human body survive freezing water? How quickly does hypothermia develop? When does confusion begin? When does unconsciousness follow? When does death arrive? Questions military officials believed might help rescue downed German pilots forced into the icy waters of the North Sea. Instead of using willing volunteers or safer research methods, prisoners were forced into these experiments without consent. You realize something horrifying. Every answer will be written using someone else's suffering. A guard grips your arm. Another positions himself behind you. You don't resist. Resistance changes nothing. They lead you to the ladder. Each rung feels colder than the last. You stare into the water. It's perfectly still, almost beautiful, like a frozen lake before sunrise. The doctor raises his hand. The assistant clicks the stopwatch. Then, a shove. The world explodes. The cold doesn't feel like cold. It feels like being struck by electricity. Every muscle contracts instantly. Your lungs seize. You gasp involuntarily. The first breath burns. The second barely comes at all. Your heart pounds so violently it feels ready to burst through your ribs. You try climbing back out. Strong hands force you down again. The doctors don't react. One calmly notes the time. Another watches the thermometer. A third observes your breathing. To them, your panic isn't human suffering. It's measurable data. Minutes stretch into eternity. Your skin feels as though it's being pierced by thousands of needles. Then, without warning, the pain changes. Your hands stop hurting. Not because they're healing, because they're losing sensation. Your fingers no longer obey you. Your jaw shakes uncontrollably. Your teeth slam together so violently you're certain they'll break. Every instinct screams at you to get out, to move, to survive. But the water steals your strength faster than you can replace it. Above the tank, pins continue scratching across paper. Heart rate, respiration, shivering intensity, loss of coordination. One doctor quietly asks another a question. They discuss your condition the way mechanics discuss an engine. Not once, not a single time, does anyone ask if you've had enough. Eventually, the violent shaking begins to slow. Not because you're recovering, because your body is running out of energy. Your thoughts become strangely distant. The room starts drifting in and out of focus. You struggle to remember where you are, or even who you are. Hypothermia doesn't simply attack the body. It attacks the mind. Confusion arrives. Then apathy. The desperate urge to escape slowly fades. Not because you've accepted your fate, because your brain is shutting down. The doctors recognize every stage. They've seen it before. One points toward you. Another writes something. The stopwatch keeps running. Finally, the guards haul you from the tank. You collapse onto a stretcher. Your body refuses to stop trembling. Every breath feels shallow. Pain radiates through muscles you can no longer control. For one brief moment, you think it's over. You survived. Then you hear another doctor say one word. Rewarming. And you realize this was only the first half of the experiment. You lie on the stretcher unable to move. Water pools beneath your body. Every breath feels borrowed. Your skin has turned pale. Your lips tremble uncontrollably. You can barely keep your eyes open. Somewhere nearby, someone says your body temperature out loud. Another voice repeats it. Someone writes it down. You aren't being comforted. You're being documented. One doctor leans over you. He presses 2 fingers against your neck. Not to reassure you, to check whether your heart is still producing useful data. He nods. Continue. One word. That's all it takes. The experiment moves into its next phase. Today, most doctors understand that someone suffering from severe hypothermia must be rewarmed carefully. But in these experiments, the physicians were trying to discover which method restored body temperature the fastest, using prisoners as unwilling test subjects. To them, you aren't a survivor. You're a problem waiting to be solved. The assistants gather around your stretcher. One wheels over another cart. Another prepares fresh paperwork. The stopwatches never stop. Neither do the notes. The experiment simply changes chapters. One doctor proposes warm water. Another prefers heated air. A third argues for body heat. They're discussing methods the way chefs debate recipes. Calmly, politely, intellectually. The only thing missing from the conversation is you. You want to tell them you're still alive, that you can hear every word, that you're freezing. Instead, your jaw refuses to cooperate. Your tongue feels thick. Your thoughts drift in and out like smoke. Without warning, strong hands lift you again. The room spins. For one terrifying moment, you think they're putting you back into the freezing tank. Instead, you're lowered into another tub. This water is hot. Far too hot. Your skin erupts with pain. Moments ago, you couldn't feel your fingers. Now it feels as though every nerve ending has been set on fire. The sudden change overwhelms your body. Your heart races. Your breathing becomes erratic. The doctors lean in closer. Not because they're worried, because this is exactly what they came to observe. One assistant announces the time. Another records your pulse. A third watches for muscle spasms. Everything has become another measurement. On another day, they try something different. No warm water. No blankets. No gentle care. Instead, they leave prisoners shivering while carefully recording how long natural recovery takes. Some never recover at all. Others drift in and out of consciousness for hours. The physicians watch, measure, compare, repeat. Every outcome becomes another chart, another graph, another report. Other methods were even more disturbing. Historical records describe experiments in which some severely hypothermic prisoners were rewarmed using the body heat of other prisoners who had also been forced into the process. These people were not volunteers, and the procedure itself was conducted without consent or concern for their dignity. Inside the laboratory, even compassion becomes another instrument. Human warmth, one of the oldest forms of comfort, is stripped of every trace of humanity, reduced to technique, reduced to data, reduced to another line in a report. The room grows quieter, not because anything has improved, because your hearing begins fading. Voices become muffled. The bright lights overhead blur into pale circles. You struggle to remember simple things. Your name, your family, the sound of laughter. For a moment, you wonder if this is what dying feels like. Not fear, not darkness, just distance, as though the world is slowly walking away from you. The doctors notice every change. One remarks that your shivering has almost stopped. Another notes your breathing has become shallow. An assistant adjusts the stopwatch. Someone writes, "Subject entering advanced hypothermia." Not, "This person needs help." Only observations. Only numbers. History would later show that many of these experiments produced data of questionable scientific value because they lacked ethical standards, proper controls, and reliable methodology. Yet the suffering inflicted on the victims was undeniably real. Eventually, the experiment ends, not because you've recovered, because they've collected what they wanted. The doctors step away. One closes his notebook. Another removes his gloves. A third lights a cigarette. Their workday continues. Your world has been shattered. The guards lift you onto another cot. Your entire body aches. Every joint feels broken. You stare at the ceiling, unable to move. The doctors are already preparing the room. Fresh thermometers, clean towels, new paperwork. A different prisoner is escorted through the door. He's shivering before the experiment even begins. He sees the tank. Then he sees you. Your eyes meet for only a second. Neither of you says anything. There are no words left. The guards lead him forward. The assistant resets the stopwatch. The doctor nods. Another experiment begins. Because here, there is always another prisoner. Always another body. Always another page waiting to be filled. And as you're carried back toward the barracks, barely conscious, one realization settles deeper than the cold ever could. The experiment was never really about finding the limits of the human body. It revealed something far darker. The true limit being tested was how far human beings could abandon their own humanity. You survive, at least. That's what the paperwork says. The doctors don't call it survival. They call it recovery, as if your body simply needed a little maintenance before becoming useful again. Days pass before you're strong enough to stand without collapsing. Every movement reminds you of the freezing tank. Your muscles ache. Your chest still burns. Sometimes your hands shake so badly you spill what little soup you're given. No one laughs. Almost everyone in the barracks shakes now. Some from hunger. Some from fear. Some from things no one can see. One afternoon, another truck arrives. Not carrying food. Not carrying medicine. Equipment. Large metal crates are unloaded outside the medical building. Several doctors gather around them with unusual excitement. You hear words you don't understand. Pressure. Altitude. Aviation. One physician smiles. Another immediately begins unpacking instruments with the enthusiasm of a child opening presents. Whatever arrived, they've been waiting for it. The next morning, another list is read. Again, your number isn't called. Relief lasts only a few seconds, because you recognize several of the prisoners being led away. Young, healthy, strong. Exactly the kind of bodies researchers prefer. The old prisoner beside you whispers, "They're going upstairs." You look toward the infirmary. Upstairs. He nods. The chamber. His voice is flat, as though he's repeated those words too many times before. Inside one of the upper rooms sits an enormous steel cylinder. Thick walls. Heavy bolts. Small circular windows made of reinforced glass. It resembles part of a submarine, or perhaps the inside of an enormous safe. Only this vault isn't designed to protect what's inside. It's designed to trap it. Several hoses disappear into the machinery beside the chamber. Large pressure gauges line one wall. Assistants check valves. Inspect seals. Adjust dials. Everything must function perfectly. The machine is expensive. The prisoners are replaceable. The purpose seems simple. German military planners wanted to understand what happened to pilots forced to extreme altitudes after aircraft damage or emergency ejections. Instead of relying on volunteers or safer testing methods, some physicians attempted to simulate these conditions using prisoners inside low-pressure chambers. On paper, it sounds scientific. Inside the chamber, it becomes something else entirely. The first prisoner enters. He's helped onto a chair positioned in the center. Leather straps secure his arms, his legs, his chest. The straps aren't there because he might become violent. They're there because panic is inevitable. A doctor checks his pulse. Another attaches monitoring equipment. Someone writes today's date. Another records the prisoner's age, weight, height, body temperature. Every detail matters. Except his name. Nobody asks it. The massive steel door swings shut. Its locking will turn slowly. 1, 2, 3 full rotations. The seal closes with a heavy metallic thud. Silence follows. The prisoner looks through the thick glass. Outside, several doctors gather around observation windows. Not one enters the chamber with him. That tells you everything. Whatever happens next, they already know it isn't safe. A hand reaches for a lever. The machinery comes alive. At first, nothing happens. The prisoner simply sits there, confused, looking around. Then he begins swallowing repeatedly. His ears are trying to equalize. His breathing changes. One doctor quietly notes the time. Another adjusts a gauge. The pressure inside the chamber continues falling. Slowly, deliberately. The machine is recreating thinner and thinner air. Higher and higher and higher, without ever leaving the ground. Within minutes, The changes become obvious. The prisoner's breathing quickens. His chest rises and falls faster. He rubs at his ears. His movements grow restless. One physician watches carefully through binoculars. Another checks a stopwatch. Every reaction is recorded. Every second becomes another line of data. The prisoner begins gesturing frantically toward the window. He's trying to say something. No one can hear him. Or perhaps, they simply choose not to. As the simulated altitude increases, his coordination begins failing. He struggles to sit upright. His hands fumble clumsily with the straps. His head droops forward, then jerks back again. One doctor calmly remarks on the loss of motor control. Another writes it down. No one reaches for the controls. The human brain depends on oxygen. Reduce the available oxygen enough, and the brain begins shutting down. Thought becomes slower. Judgment disappears. Simple tasks become impossible. Eventually, consciousness itself slips away. The physicians know exactly what's happening. That's why they continue. They want to measure every stage. Suddenly, the prisoner begins convulsing. His entire body stiffens violently against the restraints. His legs kick uncontrollably. His arms strain against the leather straps. The chamber window fogs slightly with each desperate breath. One assistant instinctively takes a step toward the controls. A senior doctor quietly raises a hand. Not yet. The assistant stops. The stopwatch keeps running. Later testimony described prisoners losing consciousness, suffering seizures, and in some cases dying during or after these decompression experiments. Some accounts also describe post-mortem examinations performed to study the effects of oxygen deprivation on the body. To the physicians, every symptom represented valuable information. To the prisoner, it was simply terror. Finally, someone turns the valve. The chamber hisses loudly as pressure slowly returns. The heavy locking wheel turns again. The steel door swings open. Guards hurry inside, not to comfort the prisoner, to remove him. His body hangs limp in the restraints. His face is pale, his breathing shallow. One doctor immediately begins examining his pupils. Another checks his pulse. A third compares today's notes with records from previous experiments. Already searching for patterns. Already planning improvements. Already thinking about the next subject. Outside the chamber, the machine stands ready once more. Its gauges return to zero. The assistants replace several sheets of paper. Fresh forms. Fresh measurements. Fresh clipboards. Someone wipes fingerprints from the glass. By tomorrow, it will look as though nothing happened here, except somewhere inside the barracks. Another prisoner will wake up to hear his number called. And somewhere inside this building, another page will begin with the same clinical heading. Subject, not person, not father, not brother, not son, just subject. And with a single word, an entire human life is reduced to an experiment. By now, you've learned the rhythm of this place. The mornings begin with numbers. The afternoons disappear into labor. The nights belong to whispers. Everyone has a story. Almost none of them have endings. The camp changes people in ways that are difficult to explain. Not just physically. The hunger becomes normal. The exhaustion becomes normal. Even fear eventually becomes routine. It's the uncertainty that never leaves. Every time boots echo outside the barracks, every prisoner wonders the same thing. Who's next? One evening, a man returns from the infirmary. At first, nothing seems unusual. He's walking under his own strength. No visible injuries. No bandages. No blood. Some prisoners even believe he was lucky. Perhaps the doctors simply examined him. Perhaps he escaped whatever happened behind those white walls. Then, 2 days later, he develops a fever. By the third day, he can barely stand. His entire body trembles beneath his thin blanket. Sweat soaks through his uniform despite the freezing weather outside. He coughs constantly. Each breath sounds heavier than the last. The camp infirmary offers little help. Prisoners watch from nearby bunks as he slips in and out of consciousness. Nobody knows what's wrong. Nobody dares ask. Only much later, After the war, would investigators uncover another chapter of the experiments? Some prisoners had been deliberately infected with diseases including typhus, malaria, tuberculosis, and hepatitis. The goal was not treatment, but to observe how illnesses developed or to test experimental drugs and vaccines under coercive conditions. The disease itself had become part of the experiment. You begin noticing patterns. Healthy prisoners enter the medical building. Several days later, they're desperately ill. Doctors return repeatedly to examine them. Not with medicine, with notebooks. One physician checks swollen lymph nodes. Another measures body temperature. An assistant carefully labels small glass vials of blood. The prisoner begs for water. Nobody answers. The fever, however, is recorded down to the decimal. One morning, your labor detail passes a small examination room. Through the partially opened door, you glimpse 3 doctors standing around a narrow bed. A prisoner lies motionless beneath a thin blanket. His breathing is rapid. His skin glistens with sweat. One doctor shines a light into his eyes. Another gently lifts his wrist. You expect concern, urgency. Instead, the doctor quietly remarks, "Temperature has increased again." An assistant writes it down. The prisoner coughs violently. Blood stains the corner of his mouth. No one reacts. Not because they don't notice, because they already expected it. Medicine is supposed to interrupt disease. Here, disease follows the plan perfectly. Every symptom arrives on schedule. Every complication confirms another theory. Every death becomes another completed report. The cruel irony is impossible to ignore. The same profession responsible for discovering vaccines, for curing infections, for saving millions of lives, is now deliberately creating illness. Not to heal, but to observe. Not to comfort, but to calculate. Some physicians even discuss infection rates over lunch, comparing cases, debating dosages, arguing over which methods produce clearer results. Outside the room, prisoners fight simply to survive another day. Inside, their suffering becomes statistics. The old prisoner who first warned you about the doctors grows quieter each week. One night, he leans toward you. So many people think cruelty begins with hatred. His voice barely rises above a whisper. But hatred isn't always enough. You wait. He stares toward the dark ceiling. It begins. When someone convinces themselves another person's life matters less than an idea, he closes his eyes. After that, everything becomes possible. His words linger with you, because you've watched it happen. None of these doctors appear consumed by rage. They don't scream. They don't strike prisoners in fits of anger. Most remain calm, professional, almost detached. That's what makes them so terrifying. Compassion wasn't violently ripped away. It slowly disappeared beneath paperwork, research, career ambition, ideology. Each small compromise made the next one easier, until eventually, injecting disease into another human being felt no different than filling another laboratory flask. Weeks pass. The fever spreading through one barracks finally begins fading. Not because everyone recovered, because many of those who didn't simply disappear. The empty bunks remain. Nobody asks where their owners went. Everyone already knows. The camp has a way of erasing people twice. First from life, then from memory. One afternoon, you notice several assistants carrying fresh boxes of glass syringes into the medical building. One laughs at something another says. A third whistles quietly while organizing supplies. For them, it's another ordinary workday. For someone inside, it's the day their body will become another laboratory. Another page, another experiment, another number added to a growing stack of reports. And somewhere, beyond these walls, future generations would struggle to understand how educated physicians could intentionally spread disease among people who had come to them powerless. The answer would never be simple, but it would serve as one of history's darkest warnings. Knowledge without ethics isn't progress, it's permission. And once science begins treating people as disposable, there is almost no limit to where it can go. Some mornings, The train sounds different. You can hear it long before it reaches the camp. The slow grinding of steel wheels. The whistle echoing across the frozen countryside. Then, silence. Everyone in the barracks stops what they're doing. Nobody speaks. Because everyone knows what comes next. New arrivals. More prisoners. More families. More lives about to disappear. You watch from a distance as people step down from crowded cattle cars. Men. Women. Elderly grandparents. Children clutching worn blankets. Some carry small suitcases. Others hold tightly to dolls or stuffed animals. They still believe they're arriving somewhere temporary. Some mothers straighten their children's coats. One father lifts his little girl onto his shoulders, trying to make her smile, trying to convince himself everything will be all right. It's one of the last ordinary moments many of them will ever share. The selection begins almost immediately. An officer points left, then right, left, right. No explanation, just a gesture. Within minutes, families are torn apart. A young boy reaches for his mother's hand. A guard pulls them in opposite directions. The child screams. The mother fights to get back to him. She's struck across the face. The line continues moving. The selection never pauses. Among the officers walking calmly through the crowd, one man stands out. Perfectly pressed uniform. Immaculate boots. White gloves. He smiles politely. Sometimes he even speaks softly to frighten children. Witnesses later remembered Joseph Mengele often appearing calm and courteous during selections, particularly when identifying twins and other individuals he considered valuable for research. That smile would become one of the most feared sights in Auschwitz, because children rarely understood what it meant. The adults did. Mengele moves carefully through the line. He's searching for something specific. Twins. If he spots two children who look alike, he immediately becomes interested. He steps closer, asks simple questions. Are you brother and sister? How old are you? Are you twins? Parents often answer honestly. Why wouldn't they? They're speaking to a doctor. Doctors help children. That's what doctors do. Except here, the truth becomes a sentence. The twins are separated from everyone else. Parents try to follow. Guards stop them. Some mothers beg. Others scream. Fathers plead. None of it matters. The children are led away. Many don't even realize they're saying goodbye forever. Some wave cheerfully, believing they'll see their families again after a medical examination. It's impossible to imagine a crueler misunderstanding. Inside the children's barracks, life looks different from the rest of the camp. There are fewer labor details. The children are sometimes given cleaner clothes. Occasionally, they even receive slightly better food. To an outsider, it might almost appear merciful. But kindness isn't the reason. Investment is. The doctors want healthy subjects. Healthy children survive longer. Healthy children produce more data. The better conditions aren't compassion. They're maintenance. Joseph Mengele's fascination with twins grew from Nazi racial ideology and genetic research. He believed studying identical twins might reveal ways to support the regime's ideas about heredity and reproduction. The children underwent repeated measurements, blood tests, photographs, and other procedures, none of which they freely chose. Every few days, the routine repeats. The children line up. Height, weight, arm length, head circumference, eye color, hair samples, blood samples, more photographs, more notes. Again, and again, and again. The measurements never seem to end. Some of the children begin recognizing the routine. One little boy asks an older prisoner, "Are we sick?" The older prisoner doesn't answer. How could he? Explaining the truth would only create terror. Lying feels just as cruel. So he simply helps straighten the child's shirt before the next examination. Sometimes, silence is the only mercy left. Not every experiment involved simple measurements. Historical records describe children being subjected to invasive procedures, repeated blood draws, injections, and surgeries that offered them no medical benefit. Many suffered lasting injuries, and many did not survive. To the doctors, the twins represented an opportunity. If one child underwent a procedure, the other could be observed for comparison. Scientific symmetry. That's what the reports called it. History calls it something else. One afternoon, you see two young sisters walking across the yard. They can't be older than 8. One reaches for the other's hand. A guard doesn't stop them. For a few brief seconds, they simply walk together beneath the gray sky. Like ordinary children. Like sisters everywhere. Then the infirmary door opens. A nurse calls their numbers. The girls disappear inside. The door closes. You never see them again. Years later, a handful of surviving twins would describe these experiences to investigators. Their testimonies would become some of the most powerful evidence ever collected. Not because they contained dramatic speeches, but because they remembered ordinary things. Holding a sibling's hand, being frightened by needles, waiting outside examination rooms, wondering why the adults in white coats never smiled at them the way real doctors did. Those quiet memories revealed something statistics never could. Behind every experiment was a child. As night falls over Auschwitz, the camp grows silent once more. Snow settles gently across the roofs. The smoke continues rising beyond the fences. Somewhere inside the children's barracks, brothers and sisters fall asleep wondering where their parents are. Some still believe they'll find them tomorrow. Some whisper goodnight. Some quietly promise each other they'll go home together. Promises made by children. Promises they fully intend to keep. The tragedy is that the adults surrounding them already know those promises can never be fulfilled. Not every experiment ended with death. Some were designed to leave people alive, changed forever. By now, you've begun to understand the pattern. Every room inside the medical building has a purpose. One for freezing, another for altitude, another for disease. Each room asks a different question. Each prisoner becomes part of the answer. Then one afternoon, another rumor begins spreading through the barracks, mostly among the women. They speak quietly, carefully, as though saying the words aloud somehow makes them more dangerous. They're taking healthy women. They come back in pain. Some never come back at all. No one knows exactly what's happening, only that the doctors seem especially interested in women of childbearing age. The Nazi leadership believed that biology could be used as a weapon. Their goal wasn't only to eliminate people through violence. Some leaders also sought ways to prevent entire populations they considered undesirable from having children in the future. To achieve that, they wanted a method that was fast, inexpensive, and capable of affecting large numbers of people. That search led some physicians toward forced sterilization experiments. Among the doctors involved, one name appears repeatedly: Karl Klauberg. Before the war, he was an accomplished gynecologist. Respected, educated, experienced. Patients once trusted him with some of the most important moments of their lives. Now, that same knowledge serves an entirely different purpose. Instead of helping women have children, he's searching for ways to ensure they never can. The women are escorted into examination rooms one at a time. The surroundings look familiar. Bright lights, clean instruments, white coats, clipboards. Everything appears professional. Everything appears orderly. If someone walked in without knowing where they were, they might mistake it for a normal hospital. That's the deception. The room looks like medicine. What happens inside does not. Some women return hours later, walking slowly, barely able to stand. Others clutch their stomachs as though every step hurts. Several develop fevers. Many experience severe pain that lasts for days. When fellow prisoners ask what happened, the answers are often the same. They wouldn't tell me. They just said it was an examination. They kept writing things down. Historical investigations found that some women were subjected to procedures and injections intended to damage or block their reproductive systems without their knowledge or consent. These experiments caused severe pain, infection, permanent injury, and, in many cases, death. The physicians weren't treating disease. They were trying to create it. The reports continue growing thicker. Every procedure generates more paperwork, more charts, more observations. How many days until fever develops? How long does recovery take? What complications appear? Could the technique be repeated? The doctors debate results during meetings. One suggests modifying the procedure. Another recommends changing the dosage. They're discussing efficiency, not humanity. One evening, a woman quietly sits beside another prisoner in the barracks. Neither speaks for several minutes. Finally, the younger woman asks, "Do you think I'll ever have children?" The older prisoner looks down at the floor. She already knows the answer, but saying it aloud would make it real. Instead, she reaches over and gently takes the younger woman's hand. Sometimes, there are no words capable of carrying that kind of grief. The tragedy reaches beyond physical pain. For many victims, the experiment stole something deeply personal: the ability to choose, to build a family, to imagine a future. Those decisions, which belong to every individual, were taken away inside examination rooms by strangers with medical degrees, all while the victims remained prisoners with no power to refuse. The doctors continued calling it research, science, progress. Those words appear repeatedly throughout official documents. Yet beneath every carefully written report, there existed another story, one that never appeared in the charts. The woman who dreamed of becoming a mother, the husband who never saw his wife again, the family that would never exist. Those losses could never be measured. No graph could record them. No statistic could fully explain them. Years later, survivors would testify before investigators and courts. Many struggled to describe the physical suffering. What proved even harder to explain was everything the experiments had taken from them afterward: hope, trust, the ability to walk into a hospital without fear, the confidence that a doctor wearing a white coat intended to heal. For countless survivors, those wounds lasted far longer than the war itself. As the lights go out across the camp, the medical building remains illuminated. Inside, another meeting is underway. Doctors compare notes. Assistants organize files. Fresh reports are stacked neatly on a desk. Outside, the prisoners lie awake beneath thin blankets. Some wonder whether they'll survive the winter. Others wonder whether they'll survive the night. And somewhere inside the laboratory, another clipboard is already waiting. Blank. Ready for another name. Or rather, another number. Because in this place, numbers are easier to experiment on than people. At least, that's what the doctors keep telling themselves. The war is beginning to change. You can't see the front lines from inside the camp, but you can feel them. The guards seem more anxious. Supply trains arrive less often. The distant rumble of artillery grows louder with each passing week. Something is happening beyond the fences. Something big. Even here, hope begins returning in cautious whispers. Maybe the war is ending. Maybe someone is coming. Maybe, if you survive long enough, you'll leave this place alive. Inside the medical building, very little changes. The experiments continue. The paperwork continues. The clipboards continue filling with numbers. It's almost surreal. Outside, Europe is collapsing. Inside, doctors are still measuring temperatures, still comparing blood samples, still arguing over procedures, as though history itself can wait until the experiment is finished. One afternoon, you pass an office with its doors slightly open. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling. Every shelf is packed with folders, neatly labeled, carefully organized, thousands upon thousands of pages. Each file represents a person, a procedure, a question, a life interrupted. The doctors don't see tragedy when they look at those shelves. They see research, years of work, careers, publications, evidence. To them, the filing cabinet is a monument to science. To everyone else, it's a monument to suffering. History would later reveal that many Nazi physicians believed they were advancing medicine and serving the state. Their experiments were often presented as scientific research, despite being built on coercion, brutality, and the complete absence of consent. That contradiction has haunted medicine ever since. Because the experiments asked real scientific questions, but they abandoned the one principle that makes science worthy of trust: Human dignity. Imagine walking into a hospital today. You sign consent forms. The doctor explains the risks. You can ask questions. You can refuse treatment. You can leave. Those rights feel ordinary, almost invisible. Most people never stop to think about them. Yet none of them exist by accident. Every one of those protections was strengthened because the world witnessed what happened when they disappeared. Inside the camp, none of those protections exist. Consent is replaced by orders. Choice is replaced by force. Patients become prisoners. Doctors become supervisors. Healing becomes observation. The white coat remains exactly the same. Everything beneath it changes. One evening, the old prisoner who first warned you about the doctors sits beside you again. He's thinner now. His cough has become deeper. For several minutes, neither of you speaks. Then he quietly asks, "What makes someone a doctor?" You think about the question. Knowledge? Training? Skill? He slowly shakes his head. No. He looks toward the medical building. Anyone can learn anatomy. Anyone can memorize diseases. Anyone can hold a scalpel. He pauses. A doctor is the person who remembers that the body belongs to someone. The words linger long after he falls silent. That idea seems obvious, until you remember everything you've witnessed. The freezing tanks, the pressure chambers, the children, the disease, the sterilization experiments. Every horror began the same way. Someone stopped seeing a person. They saw a specimen, a subject, a case, an opportunity. The language changed first. Humanity disappeared second. This is perhaps the most unsettling lesson the camp leaves behind. Evil rarely announces itself. It doesn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes, it arrives carrying credentials, diplomas, research grants, professional titles. It speaks calmly, uses technical language, publishes reports, and convinces itself that noble goals excuse terrible methods. History has shown again and again that intelligence alone is never enough. Knowledge without compassion becomes dangerous. Power without accountability becomes catastrophic. And science without ethics stops being medicine altogether. As the months pass, the sound of artillery grows closer. The guards become more restless. Some begin burning papers. Others move crates out of offices late at night. The doctors work quickly now, faster than before. Assistants feed documents into furnaces. Stacks of reports disappear into flames. Photographs curl and blacken. Charts become ash. Evidence vanishes one page at a time. They understand something now. Soon, someone else will walk through these buildings. Someone will ask questions. Someone will want answers. But paper burns more easily than memory. The survivors remain. Those who live through the camp carry every experiment with them, not only in scars, but in testimony. Years later, they would stand before investigators, judges, journalists, medical students, and they would describe rooms with white walls, doctors with polished shoes, clipboards, stopwatches, children waiting outside examination rooms. The world listened, because it had to. Their testimony changed medicine forever. In the aftermath of the war, international standards for research ethics were strengthened, emphasizing voluntary consent, minimizing harm, and protecting research participants. These principles became foundational for modern medical research. Those rules weren't written in comfort. They were written in memory. The old prisoner doesn't survive the winter. One morning, his bunk is empty. No announcement. No farewell. Just another absence. Like so many before him. But one sentence stays with you. A doctor is the person who remembers that the body belongs to someone. Years later, millions of physicians around the world would unknowingly inherit that lesson. Not from textbooks. From people like him. People whose names history almost forgot. The war would eventually end. The camps would be liberated. The buildings would fall silent. But the questions raised inside those walls would never disappear. Because every generation of scientists, every physician, every researcher must answer them again. Not with words, but with choices. And perhaps that's the final legacy of this place. Not the experiments, not the reports, not even the horrors, but the enduring reminder that the greatest scientific breakthrough in the world is worthless if it costs us our humanity. Epilogue: remembering the victims. History often remembers the names of those who committed these crimes. Joseph Mengele, Sigmund Rascher, Karl Klauberg. But history should remember something else first. The victims, the men who shivered in freezing water, the women whose futures were stolen, the children who trusted adults in white coats, the families separated on railway platforms, the prisoners reduced to numbers on a clipboard. Most never chose to become part of history. History chose them. Their suffering reminds us why medicine begins with compassion, why consent matters, why every patient deserves dignity, and why science must never forget the people it exists to serve. Because the moment we stop seeing the human being, we risk repeating the very lesson this story has tried so hard to preserve. The buildings may be quiet now. The documents may be stored in archives. The voices may have faded with time. But the responsibility belongs to all of us to remember, so that medicine heals, science serves humanity, and horrors like these remain exactly where they belong. In history, never again.